Imagine being the CEO of one of the largest banks in the country. Walking into one of your own branches, only to be denied access to your own money. How could this happen? What's really going on behind the scenes? Well, stick around, because the truth is more shocking than you might think. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to us and inspires us to create even more engaging content. Thank you. The afternoon was like any other, or at least it seemed that way. Marcus Carter, the CEO of a leading financial firm, walked into Titan Bank's downtown branch. Despite his significant stake in the bank, today he was just another man in a simple button-down shirt and slacks. No bodyguard in sight, there were no assistants by his side, no entourage, just a quiet, unassuming man stepping into the institution that he partially owned. It was a deliberate choice. He wanted to see how the average customer was treated, to experience his bank's services firsthand, without the lenses of his title and wealth clouding the view. No one in the bank recognized him. To them, he was just another person making a simple withdrawal. The everyday reality that many people often experienced in this space. The bank's usual hum of activity seemed almost too quiet today, like something was about to happen. Marcus walked up to the teller, a young woman named Jessica Bloom, who gave him a polite smile, asking how she could help. "I'd like to withdraw $10, he said, maintaining his calm demeanor. Her smile faltered just for a moment. The polite professionalism she had been trained to exude became slightly more rigid as she checked her screen. Then hesitated. She asked for his ID and, in a voice that carried just a hint of something unfamiliar, asked for the reason behind the large withdrawal. Marcus felt the shift, the slight change in the air. It wasn't anything obvious, just the way Jessica looked at him. The pause in her actions. Something wasn't right. He was accustomed to the attention his position commanded. But this was different. She didn't trust him. As she turned to speak quietly to her manager, Stephen Grant, Marcus caught the subtle exchange of words, followed by a phone call being placed to someone, no doubt someone higher up. It wasn't normal for a simple withdrawal request to be met with such scrutiny. But here he was, a man with millions in the bank, being treated like a fraud. Stephen finally walked over, his posture tall, his expression polite yet guarded. He sized Marcus up with a slow, deliberate scan from head to toe. And then, without offering any explanation, he spoke. "I'm sorry, but there's an issue with your account. We're unable to process your request today," he said firmly, without even blinking. Marcus's brows furrowed. He was used to things being handled professionally, swiftly. He could sense that this wasn't routine. And certainly, it wasn't just about the money. He could feel his heart rate increase slightly. But he kept his voice steady. "Excuse me," Marcus said calmly. "Could you tell me what the problem is? I'm a customer here. I should be able to withdraw funds from my own account." Stephen didn't answer directly, but instead repeated that they needed to verify something. The vague language only made Marcus's suspicion grow. It didn't make sense. There had to be more to this. Something deeper than a technical glitch or an oversight. Despite the unease creeping in, Marcus kept his tone even, refusing to show how unsettling the situation felt. His mind, however, was already racing, putting the pieces together. And then, just as the conversation stalled, a white customer standing in line behind Marcus was immediately helped by another teller. Without hesitation, the comparison was too obvious to ignore. Marcus took a breath and decided to test the waters. He lowered the amount, asking to withdraw a smaller sum, $1. Something trivial in comparison, but once again, the response was the same. Denied. The air felt thick with unspoken tension. Marcus watched as Jessica glanced at her manager with a barely concealed unease. It wasn't just the money. It was him, a man of his stature, of his race, who should have been treated like any other privileged client, was being viewed through a different lens today. The thought lingered, and as the bank employees exchanged furtive glances, the reality settled in. Turning slowly toward Stephen, Marcus fixed him with a steady gaze and said, "I think I understand what's going on here." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. He didn't need to ask. He knew. This wasn't about money. This was something deeper, something more insidious. And it was happening right in front of him. In his own bank. As Marcus stood there, still reeling from the strange encounter at the bank, his mind was racing. The feeling of being singled out, of being treated as something less than what he was, continued to gnaw at him. He'd read about financial discrimination before, heard the stories of other people's struggles with systemic inequality. But this was different. This wasn't just about being another customer in a long line of nameless faces. He was part of the very institution that had wronged him. He owned a piece of Titan Bank, had helped build it to the powerhouse it was today. The unfairness of it all weighed heavily on his shoulders. How had things gotten so skewed? Why had a bank where he held so much influence, where he was a shareholder, not just a client, treated him like he didn't belong? It was clear now. It wasn't just about the withdrawal. There was something far more insidious at play. He thought back to the headlines he'd seen years ago about racial discrimination in finance. The subtle ways people like him, people of color, were kept out of the system. He never thought he'd find himself caught in the very same web. But here he was, a man with millions in the bank, a part owner of the very place he was standing in. And still, they doubted him. His thoughts snapped back to the present as he made a decision. What if I show them who I am? He mulled it over for a moment. If he revealed his identity, if he dropped the CEO bomb on them right now, would they suddenly change their tune? Would the attitude shift? And would he suddenly be the person deserving of respect? But something gnawed at him. He knew that if he revealed himself, it would be for the wrong reasons. He didn't want them to treat him like some special case just because he was the CEO. He didn't want them to treat him with kid gloves because of his position. No, this was bigger than that. This was about equality, fairness. This was about doing what was right, not just for him, but for anyone who came through those doors. He turned to the teller and made a decision. I'd like to speak with the regional manager, he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Jessica blinked in surprise, her face showing clear hesitation. She glanced at her manager, Stephen Grant, standing across the room. There was no immediate reaction, just a brief exchange of looks before Stephen started walking toward them. Stephen, a man in his mid-50s, was tall and wore the usual polished, professional expression of someone who had been in the business for years. But as his eyes locked on Marcus, there was something there, an unmistakable hesitation. It was fleeting, but Marcus caught it, that subtle shift, a microsecond of uncertainty, before Stephen's lips tightened into a thin line. I'm afraid I can't accommodate this request today, Stephen said, his tone flat but clipped. There seems to be a problem with your account. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The statement was vague, yet laced with an unspoken message. Something wasn't right. The logical side of him knew that there should be no reason for his request to be denied. But the instinctive side, the side that had faced discrimination before, couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. What problem? Marcus pressed, his voice calm but firm. I've never had an issue with my account before. What's going on? Stephen didn't answer directly. Instead, he repeated the line about needing to verify something before proceeding. It was as though he was avoiding the truth, carefully crafting his words to avoid an explanation. Marcus felt a familiar sting of injustice. He didn't get angry, not yet, but the feeling of being dismissed, of being belittled, crept in. He could feel it in his chest. This slow, suffocating weight. He had worked too hard, fought too long to get to where he was. And yet here he was, treated like he was invisible. As he stood there, trying to keep his composure, Marcus noticed something else, something that hit him like a punch to the gut. A white customer, standing behind him, was promptly assisted by another teller without a second thought. No hesitation, no questioning, just polite, efficient service. That's when it hit him. The truth that had been lurking in the shadows all along. This wasn't a mix-up. This wasn't some banking error. This was discrimination. He decided to press further. I'll take out a smaller amount. Just $1, Marcus said, his voice no longer masking his growing frustration. Maybe it was a test. A simple experiment. Surely, they couldn't refuse a small sum. Could they? But again, the answer was no. They refused him again. The air felt thicker now, as if the entire room could sense the shift. Marcus stood still, facing Stephen, feeling the weight of the stares from behind him. Jessica's eyes flickered nervously to Stephen, and he could see the shift in their behavior, the discomfort, the suspicion that lingered. He turned toward Stephen and, with a deep breath, he spoke slowly, deliberately. I think I understand what's going on here. There was no anger in his voice, no shouting, just a quiet certainty, a realization that had been coming together piece by piece. The quiet, powerful knowledge that this wasn't just about money. This was about something far deeper. And as he made his way out of the bank, he didn't walk away with anger. He walked away with resolve. He had seen the truth. And now, he was determined to uncover the rest. The weight of the situation still hung over Marcus as he left Titan Bank that day. His mind was heavy with the sense that something larger than just a denied transaction was at play. The discriminatory treatment he had faced was one thing. But as he walked into his office at Carter Financial Group, a part of him knew he needed to dig deeper. He was no longer just a frustrated customer. He was now a man on a mission, someone with the power to uncover something far more insidious. Marcus made his way to his desk, his thoughts already shifting to the next move. As the CEO of a financial firm with deep connections, he had access to the kind of data that could make a real difference. Daniel Reed, his head of financial analysis, was the first person he called. Daniel, a sharp-minded analyst who had worked with Marcus for years, had access to Titan Bank's internal transactions. Daniel, I need you to pull the latest data on the branch where I had issues, Marcus said as he sat down, already pulling up the numbers in his mind. Look at the transaction patterns. Specifically for cash withdrawals. I need everything, big and small. It took Daniel a few minutes. But soon enough, he had the files Marcus requested. The data was chilling. Over the past few months, a large number of cash withdrawals had been denied. What stood out was the disproportionate number of customers affected, particularly those who were Black or from minority backgrounds. There were no official complaints or reports filed, nothing that the bank had acknowledged. Yet the pattern was undeniable. Marcus, Daniel's voice crackled over the phone. There's a serious problem here. These numbers are staggering. There's no official mention of this issue from Titan Bank. But the trend is clear. And it's targeting a specific demographic. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Discrimination, subtle yet powerful, was at the heart of it. This wasn't just a random glitch or coincidence. The implications were enormous. He needed to take action. But he needed allies first. The next call was to Olivia Chong, a senior executive at Titan Bank who had once been a trusted ally. She had already dropped a hint, a warning that there was more to the situation than met the eye. Olivia had always been a professional, but Marcus wasn't sure where her loyalties lay now. She had been part of the system, and he wasn't sure if she was still on his side. They met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. The kind of place where the hum of conversation was just loud enough to provide privacy. As Marcus sat across from Olivia, he couldn't help but notice the hesitation in her eyes. She was guarded, clearly uncertain of how much she could reveal, even though the two of them had always shared an unspoken understanding. After a few moments of silence, Marcus leaned forward, his tone calm but firm. Olivia, you've got to tell me what's really going on at Titan Bank. I know there's more to this. I need answers. Olivia looked down at her coffee, her fingers lightly tapping the mug. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus, you're not the first to be affected by this. But you're the only one who can do something about it. Titan Bank has been quietly implementing a policy that restricts cash access for certain groups that make the bank uncomfortable. And those groups, they happen to be minorities. It's not just happening at your branch, but across several others. Her words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Discrimination wasn't just happening at the branch where he had been denied, it was systematic. He felt the anger begin to build in him again, but he pushed it down, focusing on the next piece of the puzzle. Why aren't people talking about it? Marcus asked. Why isn't anyone doing anything? Olivia hesitated, then sighed. Because it's all buried. They've buried it so deep. Marcus, if this gets out, they'll lose everything. But there's a reason they've kept you in the dark. You have the power to bring this to light. You're the only one who can make this stop. The weight of her words sunk in. She wasn't just talking about financial policies. She was talking about lives, about people being denied access to the very thing they needed to survive and thrive in this country: financial equality. Before Marcus could respond, Olivia stood up, her face hardening. You don't know who you're dealing with. There's more at stake here than just your withdrawal. Think carefully about what you're doing. I can't be seen as a part of this. With that, Olivia turned and left, leaving Marcus with more questions than answers. But before she disappeared out the door, she dropped a small scrap of paper onto the table. It was a note that read simply, "Be careful. There's more to this than you think." Marcus sat there, staring at the note for a long moment. Olivia's warning rang in his ears. He knew this wasn't just about a personal grievance anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. There were forces at play here that he hadn't even begun to understand. And if he didn't act fast, he might lose everything. His fingers clenched into fists. The truth was out there, and he was going to find it. He stood up from the table, determination flooding his veins. This wasn't just about money, and it wasn't just about the bank. It was about a system that had been built on injustice, and he wasn't going to let it continue unchecked. Marcus Carter was done waiting. He was going to find the truth, expose the lies, and take down the people who thought they could hide behind their power. The tension in the air was palpable as Marcus Carter walked into the Titan Bank conference room. The large, polished table stretched out before him, with the board members seated around it, all of them looking up in surprise. This wasn't just another meeting for the CEO of Carter Financial Group. This was a direct confrontation. A test of strength with the very institution he had once helped build. He had carefully planned this moment. Marcus knew that if he revealed everything he had uncovered too soon, he would be at risk of losing everything. The stakes were high, and he couldn't afford to be reckless. His best chance was to handle the situation from within, to plant the seeds of doubt among the board members, and force them into a position where they had no choice but to confront the truth. As Marcus took a seat, he could feel the eyes of the board members scanning him, some curious, others apprehensive. Robert Sinclair, the chairman of the board and a man with decades of power and experience in the financial world, was the first to speak. His gaze was sharp, assessing, but there was a flicker of wariness in his eyes. "Marcus, I wasn't expecting this," Robert said, his voice steady but edged with suspicion. He was no stranger to the power plays of the financial world, and Marcus could tell that this meeting wasn't going to be as simple as a corporate discussion. Robert didn't look pleased to see him there, and Marcus couldn't help but notice the slight tension in his posture. "I'm here because I have serious concerns about Titan Bank," Marcus began, his voice calm but firm. "Concerns that I've uncovered through some internal data." He slid a folder across the table. Inside, the documents were meticulously organized, evidence of unusual loan rejections and large cash transactions being denied at the same branch where he had been refused his own withdrawal. He watched as the board members glanced at the files, their faces tightening with uncertainty. "This isn't just about a few mistakes," Marcus continued. "This is a systemic issue. Olivia Chong, your senior executive, gave me the heads up. There's a covert policy in place to deny financial services to specific demographic groups. Groups that aren't just customers to Titan Bank, but are being intentionally excluded." The room went silent. Some members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and Marcus could see the wheels turning in their heads. Robert Sinclair, ever the master of control, remained unfazed. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "We'll look into this," he said, almost dismissively, "but let me give you some advice. Marcus, be cautious with the accusations you're making. You're talking about a billion-dollar financial institution. Do you really think we'll be brought down by a few leaked data points?" The challenge in Robert's words was clear. He wasn't backing down, he was trying to intimidate. But Marcus was no stranger to power games. "I'm not backing down, Robert," Marcus shot back. "This isn't just about a few data points. This is about a pattern of behavior that's been deliberately hidden. People are being denied basic financial services because of their race, and I won't stand by and let it continue." The tension escalated. Marcus could feel the weight of Robert's gaze on him, but he also noticed the flickers of nervousness from some of the other board members. They were uneasy, but none of them spoke up. Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that this meeting was just the beginning. There was something about Robert's reaction that unsettled him. It wasn't the shock of someone who was hearing about these practices for the first time. Robert knew he had to. The calmness in his demeanor was too practiced, too controlled. This wasn't a rogue policy. This was part of something much larger, something deeper. As the meeting wrapped up, Marcus stood, feeling a surge of clarity. This wasn't just about the bank's discriminatory practices. This was a calculated move by people with far more power. And he wasn't just up against one man. He was up against a system that stretched far beyond Titan Bank's walls. "Thank you for your time," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. As he turned to leave the room, he heard Robert's voice one last time, cold and calculating. "Think carefully, Marcus. You don't want to make an enemy of Titan Bank." Marcus didn't flinch as he walked out of the room, the weight of Robert's words lingering in his mind. He had expected pushback, but something about Robert's warning felt different. It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning that this fight was going to be much bigger than he had anticipated. Just as he was about to exit the building, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting a call from his assistant. Instead, it was a text message from an unknown number. "If you keep digging, you'll lose more than just your money." His heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a business issue anymore. Whoever sent this was watching him closely, and they weren't afraid to send a message. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he stared at the screen. The message was clear. This was a dangerous game he was playing. But the more he thought about it, the more determined he became. The game had started, and he wasn't about to back down now. Back at his office, Marcus sat down in his chair, his mind racing. He needed a stronger plan. The truth was out there, but how far was he willing to go to expose it? The stakes had just been raised, and Marcus knew that it was time to make his move. He couldn't go public just yet. He needed more. A carefully crafted strategy, one that would force Titan Bank into a corner. He couldn't afford to trust just anyone, especially in a world full of people who could be bought. One thing was certain, though. He would expose the truth, no matter the cost. Marcus leaned against the desk in his office, feeling the weight of his next move bearing down on him. The path ahead wasn't just about exposing Titan Bank anymore. It had become a battle for his own survival. And he needed help. He wasn't naive enough to think he could take down an institution this powerful on his own. The next step had to be strategic. He needed someone who understood the media, someone who could amplify his voice in a way that Titan Bank couldn't easily silence. Lisa Davenport, a well-known investigative journalist from the New York Ledger, was the perfect person. She had made a name for herself by uncovering financial scandals and corporate corruption. And her reputation for digging deep was exactly what Marcus needed. If anyone could help him bring this story to light, it was her. They arranged a quiet meeting at a small, inconspicuous cafe on the edge of the city. The place was tucked away in a corner, the kind of spot where whispers stayed between the walls and coffee cups were never hurried. As Marcus sat down across from Lisa, he could see the skepticism in her eyes. She wasn't a stranger to big stories. But this was different. He placed the evidence in front of her, documents, transaction logs, and the data Daniel had painstakingly compiled. Lisa scanned the papers, her brow furrowing as she processed the magnitude of what Marcus had uncovered. After a long pause, she looked up from the files and met his gaze. "If this is real," she said, her voice low but steady, "this could shake the entire banking system to its core. But you need to understand something, Marcus. These financial giants have more power than you realize. They don't just control money, they control the narrative. Getting this story out won't be easy, and you'll need to be prepared for the consequences." Her words lingered in the air like a warning. But Marcus wasn't in a position to back down. If what he'd uncovered was true, he couldn't let Titan Bank continue to operate under the radar, manipulating the system at the expense of others. "I'm not afraid of their narrative, Lisa," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "What I'm afraid of is letting them get away with this." Lisa's eyes softened for a moment, and she nodded, as if silently acknowledging his determination. But her next words were heavy, filled with a cautionary tone. "If you want this to go public, we'll need to tread carefully," she said. "You're going up against people who will stop at nothing to protect themselves. You can't afford to make a mistake. I'll help you, But you need to be ready for the fight of your life." The weight of her words settled on Marcus as they ended the meeting. There was no turning back now. He had to take the next steps with precision. As he walked out of the cafe, his phone buzzed in his pocket, the screen lighting up with a news alert. A few taps revealed that something had already begun to unfold. The first blow came swiftly and unexpectedly. A series of financial news outlets published articles suggesting that Carter Financial Group was under investigation for illicit transactions. A particularly damning article from Wall Street Weekly hinted at Marcus's involvement in money laundering, complete with a blurry photo of him entering a high-end restaurant with a known financial criminal. Marcus's stomach dropped. This wasn't a coincidence. Titan Bank had struck first. They were already working to tarnish his reputation before he could even get the story out. And that wasn't all. Several of his business partners canceled scheduled meetings without explanation. His phone rang off the hook with people asking about the allegations, their voices tinged with doubt. Marcus knew exactly what was happening. Titan Bank wasn't just denying him his rights, they were trying to destroy his credibility. The pressure mounted, but it didn't stop there. That evening, as Marcus prepared to unwind at home, the doorbell rang. He opened the door to find a manila envelope on his doorstep, unmarked, with no return address. His heart skipped a beat as he bent down to pick it up. Inside was a photograph of him and his family, taken at a charity event just 3 months earlier. The image was candid, showing them laughing and enjoying the evening. Beneath it, a handwritten note sent a chill down his spine. "Give up, or everything you love will disappear." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The message was clear. This wasn't just about money or power anymore. They had crossed a line into something deeply personal. The threat was real, and it wasn't just aimed at him, it was aimed at everything he held dear. He stood frozen for a moment, staring at the photo and the note. His mind raced as the weight of the situation sunk in. This had gone from a corporate battle to a life or death struggle. He wasn't just up against a powerful bank anymore. He was up against an unseen enemy with the resources to ruin him and everyone around him. As the night stretched on, Marcus found himself standing at a crossroads. He had two choices. He could continue pushing the story into the public eye, risking his personal safety, but forcing Titan Bank to confront the truth. Or he could pull back, protect those he loved, and let the bank continue to manipulate the system. The latter option seemed like a defeat, a choice to surrender to the very forces he had spent his life fighting against. Marcus knew he couldn't back down. The stakes were too high, and the consequences of silence were too great. But how could he fight a battle against a system so powerful, so deeply embedded in every aspect of society? With a grim determination, Marcus made up his mind. He would fight, but he had to be smarter, more strategic than ever before. He wasn't just up against a bank anymore, he was up against an entire system that would stop at nothing to protect its interests. But Marcus wasn't afraid. He had the truth on his side, and he would make sure it was heard. Marcus sat in his office, staring at the stack of files on his desk. The stakes were higher than ever before. What started as a personal grievance had transformed into a full-scale battle against a corrupt system that had been hiding in plain sight. He knew he couldn't do this alone. To expose Titan Bank's wrongdoings, he needed a well-thought-out strategy. And more importantly, he needed allies. The first person he reached out to was Jonathan Pierce, a prominent financial lawyer who had a history of taking down corrupt corporations. Jonathan wasn't just a skilled litigator, he was known for his ability to navigate complex legal challenges and bring down even the most powerful adversaries. Marcus knew that if anyone could help him craft the perfect strategy, it was Jonathan. They met in a discreet office downtown, away from prying eyes. The room was dimly lit, with only the soft hum of the city outside breaking the silence. Marcus laid out everything: documents, data, and his own analysis. Jonathan listened carefully, taking in every detail before speaking. "You've got strong evidence here, Marcus," Jonathan said, flipping through the pages. "But here's the thing. You need a strategic approach. Going public now would be a mistake. If you go straight to the media, Titan Bank will crush you before you even get a chance to speak. We need to take this slow. Build a case that they can't dismiss." Marcus nodded, feeling a sense of urgency creeping in. He had come to Jonathan for a reason. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. They needed to strike when the timing was right. Jonathan's suggestion was clear: a quiet, legal battle before any media exposure. They'd work from the inside out, building the case quietly and methodically, so that when the story broke, it would be unassailable. "I'll do whatever it takes," Marcus said, determination lacing his words. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "You're going to need more evidence. Something concrete from the inside. Titan Bank's not going to go down without a fight. You need to understand, this isn't just about them refusing a withdrawal, it's much bigger than that. They've built a system that protects them, and we need to dismantle it piece by piece." With Jonathan's advice in mind, Marcus began to think about the next steps. He needed insider information, something that would crack open Titan Bank's operations from within. He thought back to Henry Jacobs, the small business owner who had been unjustly denied a loan. Henry had been through the system and had connections that might prove useful. When Marcus reached out to Henry, the conversation was tense. Henry had already suffered enough, and the scars of his experience at Titan Bank ran deep. Despite his initial reluctance, Marcus managed to convince him to meet. They met in a quiet diner, away from the prying eyes of the city's busy streets. Henry's face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with the exhaustion of someone who had been through a battle and lost. As he listened to Marcus, his hands trembled slightly. "I've been watching Titan Bank for years, Marcus," Henry said, his voice low. "I know what you're after, but I can't help you. They've been after me ever since I asked questions. I lost everything because of them." Marcus pressed him, urging him to help. "I'm not asking for much, just information. If you've seen something, anything, that could help, now's the time." Henry hesitated, then looked over his shoulder, almost as if checking to see if anyone was watching. "I might know someone," he whispered, his eyes darting nervously. "Samuel Ortiz. He used to work at Titan Bank. He knows things that could really bring them down. But I don't know if he'll help. He's terrified of them." Samuel Ortiz was a name Marcus had heard before. Samuel was a former employee who had been let go under suspicious circumstances. Marcus knew this was the lead he needed, but convincing Samuel wouldn't be easy. After some negotiation, Marcus arranged a meeting with Samuel, though it wasn't without hesitation. When Samuel finally agreed to meet, he was wary, constantly looking over his shoulder as they sat down in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Samuel was clearly on edge. "I know what you want, Marcus," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "but I can't help you. They've been watching me for months. I lost my job just for asking questions. You don't know what they're capable of." But Marcus persisted, calmly explaining the importance of the situation. "This is our chance to expose them. If we don't act now, they'll keep doing this to people, to businesses like yours. We have to take them down, Samuel. This is the only way." After a long silence, Samuel finally nodded, his eyes hollow. "Okay, I'll help, but I'll only give you what I know if you promise me something. You'll keep me safe." "I can't go down with them." Samuel leaned in closer, his voice a whisper. "Titan Bank isn't just running a few shady deals. They've got a secret risk control system in place. They're tracking customers, manipulating their credit scores and loan eligibility based on who they are, not what they've done. And Robert Sinclair, he's the one who approved it." The revelation hit Marcus like a blow. Robert Sinclair, the chairman of the board, wasn't just complicit, he was the mastermind behind the whole operation. Marcus had known that Sinclair was powerful, but he hadn't realized the extent of his involvement. This wasn't a simple case of corporate greed, it was systemic. A conspiracy that had been quietly controlling the lives of innocent people for years. Samuel handed Marcus a folder with a stack of internal emails. The documents were full of evidence, with Robert's name on them, approving the policy that had excluded minority customers and manipulated their financial records. It was proof of a calculated plan to control the system for profit. But getting this information into the right hands wasn't enough. Marcus knew that they needed more than just documents. They needed to break into Titan Bank's internal servers to access the most damning evidence. Samuel had an old access key, a relic from his time at the bank, which could give them access to the building. But the risk was enormous. If they were caught, Samuel could face legal action, or worse, Be silenced for good. Marcus weighed the risks. They only had one shot at this. If they didn't get the documents from Titan Bank's servers, their entire strategy would fall apart. He made his decision. We have to do this, Marcus said, determination in his voice. This is our only chance. The team was assembled. Marcus Carter, now fully aware of the stakes, knew that this wasn't a battle he could fight alone. The sheer scale of Titan Bank's influence meant that a direct confrontation would be disastrous without careful planning and the right allies. He needed people he could trust, people who could help him break through the bank's defenses. Daniel Reed, a financial expert and a close ally, was the first person Marcus turned to. Daniel had access to data that could shed light on the hidden dealings of Titan Bank. Together, they meticulously went through account details, tracking suspicious transactions, and isolating the patterns that could expose the bank's systemic corruption. Next, Samuel Ortiz, a former employee of Titan Bank, was crucial to the plan. Samuel had insider knowledge and, more importantly, access to the bank's internal systems. Marcus had tracked Samuel down after hearing about his involvement in the early days of the scandal. Samuel was reluctant to get involved, but after a bit of persuasion, he agreed to help. Knowing the gravity of the situation, he had his reservations, but he too had been wronged by Titan Bank in the past. Lastly, Lisa Davenport, the investigative journalist, was brought on board. Known for her fearless reporting on financial corruption, Lisa's reputation was exactly what Marcus needed. She would be ready to go public the moment they had concrete evidence. The plan was simple. Samuel would access Titan Bank's servers to retrieve the critical data, while Marcus and Daniel coordinated the next steps. Lisa would be ready to push the story into the media as soon as they had everything they needed. The night of the break-in arrived. Samuel, with his old credentials, would slip into Titan Bank's secure network undetected. Once inside, he would copy all the critical documents and send them to Marcus and Lisa. The team waited in tense silence, knowing that every second mattered. The moment Samuel accessed the bank's servers, it would set off alarms. Time was running out, but as the hours passed, the tension only grew. It was a race against time. Titan Bank was no stranger to cyber threats, and Marcus knew that if they failed to retrieve the data in time, they might lose everything. As he paced the room, his phone buzzed. A message from Samuel. I've got the files, but I've been detected. They know I'm inside. I need backup now. The sense of urgency that hit Marcus in that moment was like nothing he'd felt before. He immediately called Lisa, instructing her to prepare for an immediate release of the story. The moment they had the documents in hand, the world would need to know. Titan Bank's lies would be exposed. But if Samuel didn't make it out in time, the story would be buried before it even began. Lisa's voice was steady as she responded. I'm ready. We'll go live as soon as you give the word. Meanwhile, Titan Bank was already reacting. Marcus had no doubt that the bank's internal security was on high alert. Reports came in that large account transactions had been flagged, and Robert Sinclair, the chairman, had ordered heightened surveillance. The walls were closing in, but Marcus couldn't afford to hesitate. The clock was ticking, just as he prepared to mobilize the team for the next phase. His phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. Samuel's words were frantic. I've been caught. They're coming for me. You need to act fast. I'll try to buy some time, but you need to do this now. Marcus's heart raced. There was no more time to wait. He knew that if Samuel was caught, the data would be locked away, buried within the vaults of Titan Bank's secure servers, and their chance at justice would be lost. The plan was simple, a public spectacle. Marcus, Daniel, and Lisa would hold a press conference the next day. If they could get the data out before the bank could bury it, the story would spread faster than they could contain it. It wasn't just about the data, it was about showing the world who Titan Bank really was. The power of the truth could crush the bank's defenses before they had a chance to retaliate. As the minutes dragged on, Marcus and Daniel coordinated, preparing for the worst. If they had the documents in hand, it would be a bombshell. But if they didn't, Samuel would face the consequences alone, and Marcus might lose everything. And then came the call that no one had been prepared for. Olivia Chong, the once trusted ally, had sent Marcus a message. They're getting too close. I can't help you anymore. Protect yourself. Marcus felt his stomach twist. Olivia had been the one person who could help him navigate the inner workings of Titan Bank. Now, she was pulling away. Had she been coerced, or had she been part of the system all along? The doubt in his mind grew like a shadow. Had he been wrong about her? Had she been a part of the system from the start? The questions plagued him, but there was no time for answers. Titan Bank was making its move, and now Marcus had to face a greater challenge, not just the bank, but a betrayer in his midst. The urgency escalated. Marcus knew that this wasn't just about taking down Titan Bank anymore. This was personal. The battle for justice had turned into a war for survival, and Marcus had to decide how far he was willing to go to win. With Olivia's betrayal in the back of his mind, Marcus gathered the team for one final push. The battle lines were drawn, and everything was on the line. Tomorrow would be the day that defined everything. The final battle had begun. The morning of the press conference dawned with a heavy sense of anticipation hanging in the air. Marcus Carter stood in front of the crowd of journalists, his hands clasped in front of him, his heart racing but steady. To his right stood Lisa Davenport, the seasoned investigative journalist who had been his ally through the darkest moments of this fight. Beside her, Daniel Reed, the financial expert, was ready with all the legal documents and evidence needed to make the case undeniable. Today, they would expose the truth, no matter the cost. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves as the cameras flashed. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment that would define everything. With a calm yet resolute voice, he began to speak. We are here today to reveal the truth about Titan Bank. Marcus started, his voice carrying the weight of his words. For too long, this institution has operated under the guise of fairness while systematically denying financial services to minority groups, manipulating transactions, and creating a corrupt system that only benefits the powerful. Behind him, the screen flickered to life, displaying the financial records and internal emails from Titan Bank. The audience gasped as documents that had been hidden for years were shown to the public. The emails revealed explicit evidence of a covert policy within the bank, specifically designed to limit access to loans and services for certain demographics. The transactions were meticulously altered to inflate profits and hide the illegal activity, all while innocent customers were kept in the dark. Journalists fired questions, their voices rising in shock and disbelief as they processed the magnitude of what was being revealed. The room was buzzing with energy as the weight of the scandal settled over them. Marcus Carter had just pulled back the curtain on one of the most powerful institutions in the country, and there was no turning back now. But the victory was short-lived. Barely an hour after the press conference ended, Titan Bank issued a statement, vehemently denying all accusations. The bank's Robert Sinclair, chairman of the board, wasted no time in attacking Marcus's credibility. In a televised interview, he claimed that the evidence Marcus had presented was fabricated, stating, "The documents shown today are not only false but are the product of an orchestrated smear campaign. We will pursue legal action against those responsible for spreading these lies." The bank's legal team quickly swung into action, filing a lawsuit against Marcus for defamation, accusing him of attempting to disrupt the financial system with false claims. The battle had just begun, but the fight was no longer just about exposing the truth. It had turned into a fight for Marcus's own reputation, livelihood, and everything he had built. Marcus stared at his phone, his hand clenched tightly around it. The messages flooding in were a mixture of support and outrage. He could feel the weight of what was happening, the world shifting beneath his feet. The powerful machine that was Titan Bank was striking back, and it wasn't pulling any punches. But the surprises weren't over. As the legal threats and media chaos grew, Marcus received an unexpected notification. Henry Jacobs, the small business owner who had once been one of his closest allies, had publicly sided with Titan Bank. On social media, Henry posted a message backing the bank's claim that Marcus had falsified the documents. His post accused Marcus of having received a substantial sum of money from the bank in exchange for turning a blind eye to its actions in the past. The revelation hit Marcus like a ton of bricks. Henry had been one of the first people to open up to him, to share his own tragic experiences with Titan Bank. Now, here he was, not just abandoning Marcus, but actively working against him. The betrayal cut deep. Marcus's mind raced. Had Henry truly been part of the system all along? Was this the same man who had once believed in the fight for justice? Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something much more sinister. Who else could he trust? Olivia had already betrayed him. And now Henry, two of the people he had relied on the most, had turned their backs on him. It was then that Marcus realized the true depth of the battle he was in. This wasn't just about exposing the corrupt actions of a powerful bank. This was about survival, trust, and loyalty. It was a war against a system that had entrenched itself so deeply that even those closest to him could be manipulated or coerced into silence. His phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't from a journalist or a lawyer, it was from Lisa Davenport. She had received a warning. Titan Bank was moving quickly, and they were not going to let this go without a fight. The message was clear. Marcus was now a target. Marcus's stomach churned as the reality of his situation hit him. There was no going back. The people who had been on his side were no longer reliable, and the system he was trying to expose had already begun to fight back harder than he had ever imagined. He stood up from his desk, his mind racing. What now? Should he continue to fight, knowing that the odds were stacked against him and that his reputation, and even his life, was on the line? Or should he walk away, protect those he cared about, and allow Titan Bank to continue its unchecked dominance? The decision was excruciating, but there was only one thing he knew for sure: he couldn't walk away. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about everyone who had suffered under the weight of a corrupt system. As Marcus paced back and forth in his office, the weight of the decision pressed down on him. He couldn't let this be the end. He would fight on, but he needed to be smarter. He needed to make sure he was prepared for whatever Titan Bank would throw his way next. Tomorrow would bring the next chapter in this battle, a battle for justice. A battle for the truth. And Marcus knew that, no matter the personal cost, he would do whatever it took to win. The courtroom was tense. It was the first day of the trial, and Marcus Carter stood on one side, surrounded by his team of lawyers, ready to face off against Titan Bank's powerful legal team. The bank had brought in some of the top lawyers and consultants in the country. A clear sign that they would not back down easily. Marcus knew this was the battle of his life. If he lost here, everything he had worked for, all the sacrifices, would be in vain. Robert Sinclair, the chairman of Titan Bank, made his appearance in court. His presence was intimidating, and he wasted no time dismissing the accusations against his bank. His legal team went on the offensive, arguing that Marcus had fabricated the documents and distorted the facts for his own personal gain. Sinclair's voice was calm, but his words were sharp, aimed directly at Marcus's credibility. As the defense team's first witness, Lisa Davenport took the stand. Marcus knew this was a crucial moment. Lisa had helped expose the scandal and had been by his side from the beginning. But now, in the unforgiving spotlight of the courtroom, her testimony would be scrutinized. The defense immediately began questioning her about the accuracy of the information she had reported. They suggested that she, too, might have been manipulated or misled. The pressure was mounting on her, and Marcus couldn't help but feel the weight of it on his shoulders. The courtroom felt like it was closing in on him. Titan Bank was fighting back with everything it had. Their strategy was clear: discredit Marcus at all costs. The attack came swiftly and mercilessly. The defense began digging into Marcus's personal life, questioning the integrity of Carter Financial Group. They insinuated that Marcus's company had been involved in shady dealings, accusing him of financial misconduct and murky business practices. The courtroom fell silent when a photograph of Marcus surfaced, taken years ago, showing him at a meeting with a questionable business partner. The image implied that Marcus had been involved in suspect transactions early in his career. The photo was the kind of ammunition Titan Bank needed to plant doubt in the minds of the public. Marcus's stomach tightened as the lawyers hammered away at his reputation. The public was starting to wonder, was Marcus really the hero he claimed to be? Or was he just another corrupt businessman trying to bring down an innocent bank? But just as the case seemed to be slipping away from him, a new player entered the scene, one that Marcus never expected. Olivia Chong, once a trusted ally, walked into the courtroom as a witness for Titan Bank. The shock of seeing her there, on the opposite side, left Marcus momentarily speechless. Olivia had been a close confidant throughout this battle, providing critical inside information. Now, she was testifying against him. Her voice rang clear and cold as she took the stand. Marcus Carter, she said, has used his position to manipulate financial contracts and transactions for his personal benefit. He has misled the public and misused the trust placed in him. The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Olivia, the one person who had supported him in the darkest moments, had now turned on him. The betrayal stung deeply, and the courtroom felt like it was spinning. Was everything he had believed in just a lie? Had Olivia been part of the system all along? The doubt gnawed at him. And for the first time in this fight, Marcus wondered if anyone could be trusted. His thoughts were interrupted when his lawyer stood up to counter Olivia's testimony. But the damage had already been done. Olivia's words had planted seeds of doubt, not only in the minds of the jury but in the hearts of the public as well. As the trial proceeded, the walls around Marcus seemed to close in. Titan Bank was winning, and Marcus felt the crushing weight of their power. But he refused to give up. He couldn't. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. Then, just as hope seemed to be fading, Marcus received a message from Lisa Davenport. It was a simple text, but it carried the weight of possibility. I've got something new. It's big, but we need to act fast. Are you ready to go all in? Marcus stared at the screen, his heart racing. This was it, his final chance to turn the tide. He had already risked everything. There was no backing down now. Lisa's message was a lifeline, the last thread that could pull him out of this storm. Marcus quickly called Lisa, and she laid out her plan. She had new evidence, documents that hadn't been seen before, evidence that could change everything. She had verified it, and it was solid, but Marcus knew that to use it, they would need to make a massive push. He couldn't just play by the rules anymore. It was time to take the fight to the next level. With the help of Daniel Reed, Marcus began to formulate a new strategy. They wouldn't just rely on the court anymore. It was time to expose the truth to the world. Lisa would work with a team of journalists to leak the new evidence, creating a media storm that Titan Bank wouldn't be able to ignore. The risk was enormous. If Titan Bank discovered what they were planning, it could end Marcus's career, maybe even his life. But Marcus knew there was no turning back now. The truth had to come out. The system had to change. As he prepared for the next day, Marcus understood that this was no longer just a legal battle, it had become a political struggle. The fate of Titan Bank, and many others like it, was at stake. The truth would come out, but whether it would be enough to dismantle the system was still unclear. The next day would be crucial. Marcus and his team were ready for the fight, but the question remained, would they win? Or would this just be another battle lost to the giants they were up against? The final day of the trial arrived, and with it, a weight of uncertainty and pressure that Marcus Carter could feel deep in his bones. He had entered the courtroom earlier that day with a facade of confidence. But inside, there was a storm of nerves. Everything had led to this moment. The truth, the future of his career, and the potential to bring down a financial giant, all rested on this final act. As the proceedings began, the air was thick with tension. The courtroom buzzed with the quiet murmur of anticipation. Eyes locked on Marcus as he prepared to face the final round of his battle. The stakes had never been higher. Lisa Davenport, who had been by his side throughout this journey, was the first to speak. As the lead investigative journalist, she began to present the irrefutable evidence. Titan Bank had not just manipulated financial transactions but had actively discriminated against its customers, denying access to financial resources based on race and background. With each word Lisa spoke, the room grew more still. Every member of the jury, every attorney, and every person in the courtroom was fixated on the details she revealed. Lisa had come armed with everything she needed to prove that Titan Bank was not the respectable institution it claimed to be. As the documents flashed on the screen, detailing years of internal emails, financial transactions, and recorded conversations, it became clear. The bank had been running a systematic campaign of discrimination, all while enriching its top executives and concealing the truth from the public. The weight of it all was overwhelming, and Robert Sinclair, Titan Bank's chairman, who had been stoic up until this point, began to show cracks in his demeanor. His face hardened as he stared at the evidence being laid bare. The control he once wielded so effortlessly was slipping away. For a brief moment, his composure faltered, and he shifted in his seat. Sinclair had no choice but to admit that some of the decisions made by the bank had been executed without the knowledge of major shareholders. The mask was coming off, and the facade of respectability that had protected Titan Bank for so long was crumbling. But just as the tide seemed to turn in Marcus's favor, a shock came from the unlikeliest of places. Just before the court was set to make its final ruling, a surprise witness was called, Olivia Chong, the former ally who had once been a key source of support for Marcus, but whose betrayal had haunted him in recent days. Olivia walked into the courtroom, and the room fell silent. Marcus could hardly believe his eyes. She took the stand, and in a voice that was both defiant and regretful, she revealed the truth. Olivia admitted that she had been coerced into siding with Titan Bank. The pressure from Robert Sinclair and the institution had been too great for her to handle. She had wanted to help Marcus from the start, but she had been silenced, manipulated into following the bank's agenda. Then came the bombshell that no one had expected. Olivia confirmed that Robert Sinclair had been involved in fraudulent financial schemes for years. Sinclair had deliberately manipulated the bank's profits, ensuring that money flowed into his pockets and those of his closest allies, all while the bank exploited its customers. Olivia's testimony was a devastating blow to Titan Bank. It exposed the depth of corruption that had run through the institution like a poison, all the way to its core. With Olivia's testimony, the case against Titan Bank reached a breaking point. The balance of power shifted dramatically. Marcus's heart raced as he saw the tide turning. The truth was finally out, and Titan Bank could no longer hide behind its layers of deception. It was a moment of vindication for Marcus, who had fought so long and hard to expose the dark underbelly of the banking world. The verdict came swiftly. The judge, after considering the overwhelming evidence, ruled in favor of Marcus. Titan Bank was ordered to pay for its role in the manipulation and discrimination that had affected so many people. Robert Sinclair was arrested, and a wave of investigations ensued, targeting the high-ranking officials who had been complicit in the bank's unlawful activities. For Marcus, the victory was bittersweet. As he stood in the courtroom, the weight of the journey he had just completed began to settle on him. This wasn't just a personal win, it was a triumph for truth and justice. But Marcus knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The financial system that had allowed Titan Bank to flourish would not change overnight, and he would have to continue the fight to ensure that this victory was not a fleeting moment in history. With the news of the ruling, Marcus was thrust into the public eye. His actions had shattered the illusion of invincibility that financial giants like Titan Bank had enjoyed for so long. The world would be watching, waiting to see what happened next. But for now, he could take a deep breath, knowing that he had done what was right. As he stepped out of the courtroom, a quiet smile touched his lips. The battle had been long and hard, but the truth had won. The weight of the past few months began to lift, and Marcus looked toward the future. There was still much to do, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. Yet, in the quiet corner of his mind, Marcus knew this wasn't over. The fight for justice wasn't just about exposing one corrupt bank. It was about dismantling a system built on lies and exploitation. He had made a powerful enemy in Titan Bank, but Marcus had no intention of stopping now. The journey had changed him. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. With a calm expression, Marcus took a step forward, ready for whatever came next, knowing that the real battle had only just begun. The days following the courtroom victory were a whirlwind of change for Marcus Carter. The fight he had fought, the risks he had taken, had paid off, but the victory felt both sweet and bitter. His life had been irrevocably altered. The truth, once hidden in the shadowy corners of Titan Bank, had been dragged into the light. The corrupt practices, the manipulation, and the discrimination, it was all there, for the world to see. Marcus's reputation soared. He had not just fought for his own dignity, he had fought for the dignity of those who had been crushed by the very system he had helped build. Yet as much as his victory was celebrated, Marcus realized that living a normal life was no longer an option. His name had become synonymous with the fight for justice, and it was a heavy mantle to bear. Carter Financial Group, once a smaller player in the industry, was now the center of attention. The company was flooded with opportunities. New investors, eager to align themselves with Marcus's fight for transparency, came knocking. Yet, with the newfound attention came fierce opposition. Rival firms, threatened by the changes Marcus was advocating for, launched attacks. The financial world had its claws out, and Marcus was at the center of it. Amid the external pressure, Marcus felt the sting of personal loss. He had lost key allies in the battle. Olivia Chong, who had been a vital ally from the beginning, was forced out of the finance industry entirely. The fallout was a cruel reminder of the cost of fighting the system. Samuel Ortiz, the whistleblower who had provided the critical evidence, had been detained for his role in exposing Titan Bank's corruption. The system had exacted its toll on everyone who had dared to challenge it. The pain of losing these allies weighed heavily on Marcus. He couldn't help but feel the isolation creeping in. The people who had once been by his side, his friends, his collaborators, had either distanced themselves or disappeared altogether. Some out of fear, others out of self-preservation. The fight for justice had cost him more than he could have ever imagined. And as he stood in the silence of his office, he couldn't help but wonder how much more he would have to sacrifice before it was all said and done. But amid the wreckage, Marcus was faced with a crucial decision. He could choose to step back, let Carter Financial Group return to being just another successful investment firm. He could choose the easy path, avoiding further battles, protecting what little peace he had left. Or, he could take on an even larger mission, one that involved more than just his company. He could reshape the financial industry itself. The system he had helped build, the one that had corrupted so many, needed to be dismantled. But to do that, he would need more than just himself. He would need allies who were as committed to change as he was. And so, Marcus made his choice. He would not let this be the end of his story. Carter Financial Group would no longer be just a place for making money. It would become a beacon for those who fought for financial equity and transparency. It would be a voice for those who had been silenced by institutions like Titan Bank. The journey ahead was going to be even harder than the one he had just completed. But it was one that Marcus was prepared to take. Yet, despite his victory in court, Marcus knew that the fight was far from over. Justice had been served in this case. But the financial world was still rife with corruption. The same systems that allowed Titan Bank to thrive existed in other institutions. And they would not fall easily. While the investigation into Titan Bank was ongoing, Marcus understood that real, systemic change would take more than just one victory. The financial community was far from being reformed. Titan Bank's actions were just the tip of the iceberg. As Marcus sat in his office late one evening, the phone rang. It was Lisa Davenport. The voice on the other end was urgent. "I've just received something from an anonymous source, and it's not just about Titan Bank," Lisa said, her voice tight with tension. "It's bigger. This is an entire network of financial manipulation. One that spans across countries and influences the world's largest economies." The weight of her words hit Marcus like a freight train. He knew the battle wasn't over. What they had exposed was just the beginning. Lisa's next words confirmed the chilling realization that had been slowly sinking in. "I think you're going to need help, Marcus. This is bigger than just one bank. We're talking about a shadow financial network that's been pulling strings for decades. It's time to fight back. For real." Marcus's thoughts raced as he processed Lisa's words. This wasn't just about one corrupt institution anymore. This was about something much larger. Something global. The fight he had started against Titan Bank was merely a stepping stone. If they were going to take down this network, they would need to think bigger, act smarter, and gather allies from every corner of the world. Standing outside Carter Financial Group's headquarters, Marcus looked up at the building that had been the epicenter of his rise and now his most recent victory. The sunlight was dimming, signaling the end of another day. But Marcus's mind was already racing toward the future. This battle wasn't just about justice for a few, it was about fighting an entire system. And he knew, deep down, that if he was going to continue on this path, the next battle would be even harder than the last. There were more powerful forces at play now. Forces that operated behind the scenes, pulling strings and shaping the world in ways no one could have imagined. Marcus knew that the road ahead was going to be tough. But he was ready. He was ready to take on the global financial system itself. He had already survived the worst that Titan Bank could throw at him. And now, with a renewed sense of purpose, he was determined to make the system work for everyone, not just the privileged few. The war wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. As the dust settled after Marcus's victory, his eyes turned to something larger. The war against Titan Bank had been won, but it was clear to him that this was only the beginning. The financial world he had uncovered was just a fraction of a much larger, darker network. Armed with the evidence he had fought so hard to obtain, Marcus and his team began to track the roots of this corruption further, diving deeper into the underground financial systems that manipulated nations and economies from the shadows. Lisa Davenport and Daniel Reed remained steadfast allies. Lisa's investigative prowess and Daniel's financial insights proved invaluable as they pieced together information that connected the dots between massive financial institutions and the secret dealings that shaped global politics. Samuel Ortiz, having been released on bail, rejoined the team, now determined to finish what they had started. He brought with him even more confidential documents, crucial details that would expose the full extent of Titan Bank's illegal activities. As they worked tirelessly, Marcus began to realize the enormity of the web they were attempting to untangle. The battle with Titan Bank had only revealed a small fraction of the financial corruption. Behind the bank stood powerful global entities, unseen forces that controlled everything from political policies to international trade. The network was vast, and its influence stretched far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Marcus wasn't just fighting a bank anymore, he was taking on an entire underground system of financial power. The deeper they dug, the more apparent it became. They were up against something that was beyond simple corporate greed. This was a network designed to control the world. It wasn't just about money, it was about power. And it was no longer a question of taking down Titan Bank. It was about dismantling a system that had been built over decades. A system so entrenched that it felt like an unstoppable force. Despite the magnitude of the challenge, Marcus's resolve hardened. He knew that to truly change the system, he couldn't do it alone. He needed allies from all sectors, politics, media, and non-governmental organizations. This fight was bigger than any one person or company. It was a fight for fairness, transparency, and justice in the financial system that governed the lives of millions. So, Marcus began assembling an alliance. He reached out to politicians who had long criticized the financial industry, journalists who had risked their careers to expose corruption, and NGOs that had fought for economic equality. Together, they could form a united front against the covert powers that ran the world's financial systems. This was the beginning of a financial revolution, one that would challenge the corporate giants and, more importantly, shift the global balance of power. As the alliance grew, Marcus knew this would not be a quick battle. The enemies they were facing were powerful, with resources at their disposal that far outweighed anything Marcus and his team had. But despite the overwhelming odds, Marcus was determined. His fight was no longer just about revenge, it was about creating a new world order. One that prioritized fairness over profit and transparency over secrecy. Finally, the time came for Marcus and his team to reveal their findings to the world. The documents were released, and the shadowy world of financial manipulation was exposed for all to see. As the story broke across the globe, international financial institutions began to take notice. Some took immediate action, tightening regulations and pledging reforms, while others scrambled to protect their interests. But Marcus knew that the real battle was far from over. The financial revolution he had started was just a spark. To truly change the system, he would need more than just public attention. The road ahead would be long, filled with resistance, and fraught with political and economic obstacles. But Marcus had no intention of backing down. He had seen the power of the underground financial system firsthand, and he was determined to fight until the very end. As he looked to the future, Marcus realized that this wasn't just about dismantling corrupt banks or exposing financial fraud. It was about creating a new, just financial system that could serve the needs of all people, not just the elite few. This battle wasn't just for the future of banking, it was for the future of society itself. Marcus stood before his allies, knowing that they were about to embark on a journey that would change the world. The revolution they had started was bigger than just a few financial institutions. It was a fight for justice on a global scale. And Marcus knew, deep down, that as long as they had the truth and the courage to fight for it, they would never give up. The revolution had begun, but the real fight was just starting. As we wrap up today's story, one thing is clear: power, trust, and transparency are all fragile. Even those at the top can be blindsided by the very systems they help create. Marcus's journey reminds us that seeking justice isn't always a straight path. It's often a battle against forces that can easily go unseen. But in the end, truth has a way of rising to the surface. What do you think? Can one person truly change the system? Or is the power of the elite too strong to break? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Undercover Truths for more captivating stories that uncover the truth behind the headlines.